Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight and welcome to the program. My name is Devin Smith and I'm an adult services librarian at the Longmont Public Library. First of all, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Longmont Library for funding this program and other programs like it. We do ask that you keep yourself muted and your camera off. If you do have questions for Adrian or if you're having any technical difficulties, please put that in the chat and Johannes will address those. I'm very excited tonight to welcome our presenter, Adrian Miller. He's an award-winning author, attorney, and certified barbecue judge. He will be discussing his new book, Black Smoke, African Americans and the United States of Barbecue. And if you listen to CPR, he was on CPR the other day, and he's just so great to listen to. And yeah, if you've never heard him speak before, you are in for a real treat. So I will hand that over to him now.
Well, thank you so much,
it's yours,
Devin.
Adrian.
All right. Thank you so much, Devin, adding a lot of pressure on me. But no, it's good to be with you all tonight. And thank you for joining us to hear about Black Smoke, which is my latest book. It just, what the publishing date was last Tuesday, or the Tuesday before, April 27th. So it's a brand new baby for me. So I have a presentation. It's going to be a PowerPoint. It's about 45 minutes. And then I love to hear your questions and fight about barbecue. I think that's one of the most fun things that I get to do with this book. So on with the show. So this is a picture of me in Boney's Smokehouse, which was one of my favorite barbecue joints. And it was in a Black-owned place in downtown Denver. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it closed. So really sad. But that's me, saying that, hey, this is the real deal kind of barbecue. All right. So tonight you are encouraged to do social media. So on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, I'm known as the Soul Food Scholar. So feel free to say, hey, this is a great presentation, whatever you want to say. If you have something negative to say, you can hold on to that. There's really no reason to put that out there. But I am Soul Food Scholar. All right. So a little bit about my writing journey. I was my first book was Soul Food, The Surprising Story of American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time, which won the James Beard Award in 2014. And then my second book was The President's Kitchen Cabinet, The Story of the African Americans who are fed of first families from the Washingtons to the Obamas. That was also nominated for several awards. And so what you'll find in my writing is I'm all about discovering these kind of hidden histories or maybe revealing things that had come before. So it was really during the research for my soul food book that I started thinking about barbecue, because so many soul food joints have barbecue on the menu, and then so many Black-owned barbecue joints have soul food side dishes. So that's really what kind of got me thinking about soul food. All right, so that's my writing journey. But now, okay, I just had to give you a drive-in feel. Okay, so what really germinated this book was 2004. I was watching the Food Network, and there was a show called Paula's Southern Barbecue. And, I had I was already working on the soul food book, and I thought, okay, well, let me check out this program because maybe I can find out a little bit more about Southern barbecue culture. And so after an hour-long show, when the credits were rolling, my mouth was agape. Why? Because no African Americans had been interviewed for this show. So I'm just sitting there thinking, well, how does that even happen? And then I thought, well, maybe I got confused. I didn't read the promo ad very closely. Maybe it was Paula Deen's Scandinavian barbecue. And so I just had to really kind of suss this out. So I started paying closer attention to food media. And what I found is that basically African Americans had been pushed to the margins of barbecue. And that did not square with my experience, because barbecue was a very vibrant part of my food culture growing up, even in a place like Denver, Colorado, which usually loses me all street cred on the subject of barbecue. But, from the South and different parts of the country, I knew that African Americans were important to the American barbecue story. So I had to figure out what was going on. So I call this is how it started. So we're going to zoom in here if we can for a second. Yeah, there we go. All right. So this is a Harper's Weekly illustration from 1895. And this was something called the Atlanta Exposition. And at this exposition, they had a real Southern barbecue. And so the way you're looking at barbecue illustrated here is how barbecue was for about 200 years. And there's still some people that cook this way, but not a lot of people. So the one thing to understand here is you've got two African-American men who are cooking whole animal carcass. In this case, they're cooking a whole pig that's been butterflied, and it's over a trench, usually about 3 or 4 feet wide, a couple of feet deep. And that trench is filled with hardwood burning coals. You can kind of see some of them. And then you've got like this older gentleman who's kind of just directing the show. And you've got some people over here watching because this is quite a spectacle. And then in the background, you can see elevated, there are some fires going, and the gentleman that's cooking is making something called Brunswick stew, which if you're from Georgia or Virginia, you've heard of this. It's really kind of a hunter stew. In its earlier iterations, it was kind of squirrel meat and vegetables, but later it became standardized to be chicken and vegetable stew that's often served with barbecue in the South. All right, so this is really important to notice this because this shows you how barbecue captured the public imagination, at least back in that time. So no, what's interesting though is that once we move to other time periods, you're going to start to see barbecue really kind of change in perspective and how it's implemented. All right. So I just wanted to give you a sense of that panorama and how barbecue plays out. And again, this is from Harper's Weekly, November 9th, 1895. So this was a very big deal and written about in newspapers across the country. All right. Then we get to this scene, and we're going to zoom in here. So this is from Bon Appetit magazine in the summer of 2003, July 2003. And this article is called Who's Who in American Barbecue. And if you look at this scene, one thing that strikes out is, like, first of all, it's like a backyard barbecue. People are grilling, playing badminton, croquet, all kinds of stuff. But if you notice, there are no African Americans here. The only people of color is the guy in the middle with the beach ball. He's Asian American. You've got one woman here. But other than that, it's a bunch of white dudes. And this is really how barbecue is perceived by the time you get to the 1990s and the 2000s. And so the question is, whoops, sorry about that. So the question is, how do we go from this to this? Now, before we get to that question, we have to look at the, and that's why I wrote this book, Black Smoke. So before we get to that, we have to look at the Native American Foundation. You know, often the early history of barbecue is explained that Europeans come to the Caribbean, and while they're in the Caribbean, they see a type of cooking that they've never really seen before. Eventually, they call that barbecue. And then Europeans bring that barbecue, that cooking method and style to the American, what would eventually be called the American South, to the North American mainland. And then barbecue is born because then you're cooking European animals instead of the wild game and fish and other things that Native Americans were cooking. Well, that was interesting, but it just didn't always make sense to me. And so what I did is I started poking around and looking at the travel diaries of Europeans that were exploring the American South in the 1600s and 1700s. And I took note of how they observed Native Americans cooking. So there was really kind of several smoking traditions in terms of meat that arose. And you have to remember, Native Americans weren't always cooking meat for immediate feasting or consumption. A lot of times they were cooking meat to preserve it for later use. So one example is piercing sticks. So with piercing sticks, what would happen is usually venison would be killed and the meat would be stripped off into kind of shards. And you could either have a morsel that was on the very tip of a stick that was then angled over the fire, or it was kind of butterflied or flayed out in a way, and a framework was created on the sticks, and then the sticks were bent towards the fire or bent back, depending on how much you wanted to cook it, smoke it, and so there was often a rotation going on. Then you have the rotating spit. Now, the rotating spit is very similar to what Europeans the method they were using in Europe. So that would have looked familiar to them. Then you've got the raised platform. So this raised platform, this is what Europeans saw in the Caribbean. And so basically it's like placing four sticks in the ground and then creating a lattice across a pattern so that you could lay fish, vegetables, and other things and have a very, very slow fire. So some of the European travel diaries would say, hey, you know, sometimes they were cooking this for a couple of days. So it wasn't really fast cooking. Another example is the earth oven. And the earth oven is something you see all around the world. And the earth oven is essentially digging a vertical hole and then putting your fuel source at the very bottom of the hole. So usually it was a mixture of wood and rocks or something else, and that was burned down to create heat. And then there would be layers of vegetation, usually very green vegetation, so it wouldn't catch on fire, and then the meat. And so you just kind of stack these upon one upon each other, and then you would either seal the hole by covering it up with dirt or putting something on there that would trap that heat. And then this would cook for several hours, sometimes all day long, like they would do this early in the morning and then finish the cooking early in the evening, or they would let this cook overnight. But eventually what leads to barbecue is something that I call the shallow pit method. So now this is the final version of barbecue, kind of like what you saw in the Harper's Weekly ad. But essentially, there were several Native American tribes that would essentially cook by creating a shallow depression in the ground. They would have a mixture of wood and rocks, and then whatever meat they had, they would just actually place it on the rocks or directly on the wood and let it cook that way. So it was very fast cooking, not as slow as the other methods. And what I argue in my book is that what we call barbecue is a fusion of kind of this shallow pit technique, adding the European quicker grilling traditions, something that was called carbonadoing, and then you get this kind of intermediate hybrid cooking that develops in the 17th century, and eventually it develops to what we call Southern barbecue or Virginia barbecue by the time we get to the end of the 1700s. And that is pretty standard. Like you saw in the Harper's Weekly illustration, it's a pit with hardwood burning coals, and then there's several sticks laid across, and the meat is cooked on there, usually whole animals that are butterflied. And it's not just pork. It could be sheep. And if they were doing cows, that they would do, because cows are so big, they would actually quarter the cows and cook them that way. So that's what barbecue becomes. All right, so then by the time you get to the 19th century, barbecue and blackness get wedded. Why? Because barbecue is very labor intensive. So early barbecue were very small gatherings. Usually it was just like a private party, maybe some family, extended family, friends were there. But then barbecue becomes more and more popular and starts to get supersized. And the thing about barbecue that makes it one of the perfect party foods for that time in our history is that it was scalable. So as long as you had enough land and you had enough labor and you had enough animals, you could put on a barbecue for a lot of people. And we get several reports by the 1830s of barbecues for 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people. Now, I don't know if those numbers are accurate because they didn't have satellite technology so they could actually count the numbers, but we just know that there were a lot of people. And the racial norms of the time was if you were going to do something that required a lot of labor and you didn't want to pay the people to do it, you would have enslaved African Americans do it. So enslaved African Americans become barbecue's principal cooks. And here's an example of why that was, the conventional wisdom. So this is a newspaper article called A Virginia Barbecue that was published in Richmond, Virginia in 1839. And I want to direct you to this first part of the paragraph. It says, a friend who is a native of Virginia has furnished us with the following account of the manager of arranging a barbecue at the South. An agreeable and retired place is selected near some spring and pleasant grove. On the previous day, some favorite Negro man of reputation for skill and experience in the business is sent up with his assistants, who proceed to make a kiln or pit of stones. So essentially, and this is not an anomaly, in several newspapers of the time, essentially African Americans are part of the recipe, part of the process. And the idea is that you cannot have a legitimate barbecue unless you have African Americans involved. So as time goes on, by the time you get to the 1850s, enslaved African Americans and later their descendants through emancipation become barbecues not only go-to cooks, but most effective ambassadors. And so since African Americans were the ones that were pressed to do this service, essentially a Southern barbecue, which starts in Virginia really and moves around the South with slavery as slavery expands. Virginians would go to another place, they'd bring their barbecue. And so if they did a barbecue in Kentucky, in the early years, it was called a Virginia barbecue in Kentucky. But then later that would be called Kentucky barbecue. And so, and then in time, it would just called Southern barbecue because it became associated with the region. And so you had all of these really skilled African Americans, and after emancipation, they have a very marketable skill. So whenever somebody wanted a taste of Southern barbecue, they would actually put African Americans on trains, stagecoaches, and boats to have them go to other places and replicate a Southern barbecue. And sometimes those African Americans stayed in that area, but a lot of times they returned back home. But then we have story after story of African Americans leaving the South for other opportunities across the country, and they settle in a place and kickstart that place's barbecue scene. So I talk about how African Americans become the go-to cooks, and then certainly start to spread barbecue's popularity and reputation. Now, you have to understand, there were certainly white men who were doing barbecue, but overwhelmingly, it was African Americans who were doing that work. It really isn't until the 1890s that you see more and more white men as prominent barbecuers. And a lot of that has to deal with a lot of African Americans leaving the South to go to other places, and also seeking better economic opportunity, because you could eke out a living doing barbecue, but it wasn't something that was going to bring in a lot of big bucks, at least not at that time. So after talking about this, I talk about church barbecue culture. And so the Black church was one of the earliest autonomous institutions in the Black community. And politicians and preachers figured out pretty early on that if you had barbecue, you can get a good crowd. And so barbecue was very important to building the Black church and also building community. So on the left-hand side of your screen, I have an ad that was in a Black newspaper in Montana in the 1920s, and it's talking about Southern barbecue to benefit an African Methodist church. My faith tradition is the African Methodist Episcopal Church, so that's probably why I picked this example. Now you can see that he's doing a whole cow, so that's not a pig. But one thing I want to disabuse you of is barbecue was definitely not just pork in the South. It could be any whole animal, but usually it was either a pig or a sheep. And so that's what Southern barbecue was. And then anything else, possum, raccoons, woodchucks, all kinds of stuff could show up on the menu. Now, the gentleman on the right, longtime Denverites, you probably recognize him. He is Daddy Bruce Randolph Sr. There's a street and a school named after him in Denver. And I picked him because of his humanitarian impulse. And he was a man of faith, and he really lived his faith. And so even though he ran a barbecue restaurant in Denver for a long time, starting in 1960 until the mid 1990s, he was really known for the free meals that he would give away at Thanksgiving. And just as a testament to his generosity to the community, that tradition continues to this day. I think it was disrupted a little bit by the pandemic, but he generated national headlines for his generosity. So I wrote about Daddy Bruce Randolph. And what you'll find in my book is with all of these chapters, as I go through them, I tried to find one or two people from history who really exemplified the themes of that chapter. All right. And then after talking about the connections between church and barbecue, I talked about what I call barbecue freelancers. So these are the people that emerge from slavery with this very marketable skill. They travel around the country. And this is one guy who comes to Colorado. So he's one of my favorite people that I discovered in my research. So his name is Columbus B. Hill. He's from West Tennessee. He shows up in Denver in the late 1870s. And I think that's just to follow a brother of his, a guy named Mohican B. Hill, who was a very famous waiter at that time. And so Columbus B. Hill arrives, and then by the early 80s, in the 1880s, he's doing barbecues for thousands of people. So in 1882, there was something called the Denver Merchant Barbecue. So 5,000 people showed up for that one. He helped with the cooking for that. And then on July 4th, 1890, when they had a cornerstone laying ceremony at the Colorado State Capitol, He did a barbecue in front of the Capitol for 25,000 people. Not everybody got fed. There was a little belly aching, but a lot of them did get fed. And then one of the wildest barbecues that ever happened in 1898 at the Denver Stock Show. At that time, it was unclear whether Denver would keep the stock show, so they wanted to have a really fancy barbecue. So they planned a VIP barbecue for 5,000 people. Well, word got out in Lodo, which was the seedy part of town at that time, and 30,000 people showed up for this barbecue for 5,000 people. The crowd was getting very agitated, and someone had the bright idea that maybe if they gave out free beer from Zhang Brewery, people would chill out. Well, as you can guess, the very opposite happened. There was a description that the governor of Colorado and the mayor of Denver at that time got on a grandstand with a bullhorn and tried to calm people down, and people started throwing food at them and other objects because they were very hungry. So this turned into a full-blown riot. It really hurt Columbus B. Hill's reputation, but he does bounce back eventually, and he's doing barbecues in the community until he dies in 1923. As a final footnote, I want to say that I actually found his unmarked grave in Riverside Cemetery in Denver. Now, pre-pandemic, I was actually raising money to buy him a headstone so I could give this brother a proper send-off, but I had to suspend it because of the pandemic. So once we get to the point where we can gather again, I'm going to do that because I would like to have a ceremony at his grave and just mark this remarkable man. But one thing that was really interesting is, by the time we get to the 1800s, you have people in the press who are actually taking the time to interview these barbecuers. They're treating them respectfully and as experts. Now, this is not uniform. There's plenty of racism that happens when dealing with these African-American men and a few women. But I just thought it was remarkable that here he is presented in a very respectful way and as a barbecue expert. And then I talk about barbecue business. So if you're from Kansas City, you'll probably heard of this gentleman on the left. His name is Henry Perry. He is the acknowledged grandfather of Kansas City barbecue. He's from West Tennessee as well. He shows up in the Kansas City area around the 1900s. Now, if you go back into Kansas City history, there were certainly people doing barbecue before he showed up, but for whatever reason, it really caught fire while he was in town. He didn't have a restaurant at first. He was really just kind of operating in an alley, but soon he had a restaurant. And what you'll find is there was a lot of self-promotion when it came to barbecue. So you've got a lot of people calling themselves barbecue kings, and he's doing it. They're as numerous as those Saudi Arabian princesses or those Nigerian princes who keep emailing me for money. So very numerous, but self-promotion was part of the game. And if you look at the menu there, you could see all the kinds of things that were on it. He has barbecued meats, but he's got possum, groundhog, coon, beef, pork, and mutton. So I really want to show you that barbecue was very, very eclectic in terms of what meat might be served. It wasn't just pork or just beef. On the right-hand side is a woman named Ernestine Vandeval. If you've never heard of Nicodemus, Kansas, it is an all-Black community that was founded in western Kansas. It was founded by people who left the South in the 1870s. They were called exodusters. And they started communities. And Nicodemus was one of the more famous of those communities. Ernestine Vandeval grew up in Nicodemus and eventually made her way to Pasadena, California, where she ran a soul food joint and a barbecue joint. Evidently, Walt Disney was a big fan of her food. But at some point later in life, she returns to Nicodemus to run a restaurant, and she started Ernestine's Barbecue there. She died a few years ago, but her niece, Angela Bates, who worked as a teenager in the Pasadena restaurant, has taken on the business in Nicodemus, Kansas. So it's not a full-time barbecue place. It's really only open on the weekends when most tourists are there. And every late July, early August, they have basically a town reunion. So anybody who lived in Nicodemus or is connected to the community, they come back for a big kind of family reunion. And it's great because they allow anybody else to join the party. And it's one of the most welcoming environments you'll ever experience. Then after talking about business, I get into, is there an African-American barbecue aesthetic? And I'm going to go through that in just a moment. But I can tell you this. African-American barbecue is all about sauce. We love sauce. In fact, I have been to restaurants where I have been served barbecue where it was in an ocean of sauce and there were little islands of smoked meat poking through. That's how much sauce was important. So on the left, you've got a cartoon from Arthur Bryant, about Arthur Bryant, who I'll speak about in a moment, but he was a famous barbecue man in Kansas City. When he died in 1982, the main newspaper there, Kansas City Star, ran this editorial where St. Peter is at the pearly gates, and the first question he asks them is, "Did you bring the sauce?" Also, on the right-hand side, you'll see one of the few barbecue sauce ads that features an African American. And there's a lot of talk about Aunt Jemima retiring and Faustus and Uncle Ben. And I have to tell you, I'm a little surprised that a similar character did not emerge for barbecue, given the strong associations that African Americans have. But one reason I like this ad is it's showing the old school barbecue. You can tell that's a pit with some meat, like butterflied animals on top, and he's cooking it. And he's presented as an expert, an older man, and he fits a lot of the descriptions of the barbecuers from that age. This barbecue ad was in the 1910s, and so a lot of descriptions of African Americans. Unfortunately, a lot of them did not have their names mentioned in such press reports, but they were observed and recognized as experts. And then I talk about competition barbecue, and I wonder, well, why aren't there more African Americans in competition? Because competitive barbecue is very, very popular. And mentioned earlier that I'm a barbecue judge. I'm a certified barbecue judge in the Kansas City Barbecue Society. And I became a judge because I thought I could learn more about barbecue by doing that. And so people often ask me, so, how did you become a judge? Well, I'm reading at that time, the Denver Post in 2004, and I see an ad, become a judge, come to the Adams County Fairgrounds. I was like, all right. So I went to the Adams County Fairgrounds. I walked in the room. First thing I noticed is I saw my future because I was the only guy under 250 pounds, but I was like, okay, that's just my future. I sat down, and what they do is they go through process. So they don't really teach you about cooking. It's all the process of being in a contest. So they told me that, hey, the categories are beef, which is usually brisket, pork, which is usually pork shoulder, pork spare ribs, and chicken. Usually people make chicken thighs because they won't dry out. And then you judge on a 9-point scale on taste, texture, and appearance. And then they tell you about the arbitrary rules that they have for the society. So for instance, Kansas City Barbecue Society, you can only make your barbecue on 3 certified greens: green leaf lettuce, flat leaf parsley, and cilantro. So if you made the best barbecue in the world and you presented it on collard greens, disqualified. Then after that, they bring out barbecue so you can get the hang of tasting and scoring. And then they purposely bring out something that violates the rules just to see if you catch it. And if you don't, they would say, well, Adrian, you should have noticed this. And then you stand up and you take a barbecue oath, which I will not repeat right now because it's a sacred thing. And I already know that some of you are going to mock it, so I'm not going to repeat it. If you want to learn the oath, you got to become a barbecue judge. You have to go through the same thing I did. And then you get your badge in the mail. And at that point, you can go judge any competition that body sanctions. So here's the trick. When I became a judge, barbecue judging was not, or competitive barbecue was popular, but not crazy popular like it is now. So when I was a judge, I was judge number 2,625. Now there are over 70,000 judges. So if you want to judge a contest, unless you're sitting at your computer at the very moment that a contest opens up and they take applications for judges, if you don't sign up right then, you're on a waiting list forever. So pretty much I only judge for special occasions and celebrity contests. So, and here is a look at Bessie Mae Cathay, and she is the first winner of the Memphis in May competition in 1978. And she, as you can see, she showed up with a very minimal setup and won that competition. It's hard, I mean, it's possible, but it's hard to imagine anyone accomplishing that same feat today because you have to buy a rig, there are entry fees, all kinds of things. And so what I have observed is that for the most part, when a competition has all of these fees and other things, you don't have heavy African-American participation. Because in addition to the fees, you have to have a certain kind of lifestyle because you're going to be there from Thursday to Sunday. Most people who work only have 2 weeks vacation. So if you're going to say to your honey, hey, let's use all of our vacation and go to barbecue competitions, your partner might be into that, but they might not. And so if you're going to compete for the big money in barbecue, you have to go to several of these contests. But when there's a contest that's either free for entry or low cost, African American participation is pretty high. Excuse me. One of the people I profile in my book is Sylvia Curry. She's the Lady of Q. She's one of the most decorated people on the barbecue scene, and she's a great. And the thing about her is she does all of this stuff by herself. So if you've watched any of those barbecue competition shows, usually they have one or two helpers. Miss Curry's not feeling that. She's like, look, it's Sylvie time, and I don't need to be bothered. If you have Netflix, she's actually on a show called The American BBQ Showdown, which debuted quite a few months ago. She has a deep run in the competition, so I'm not going to give anything away, but I think you'd be very impressed by her cooking. All right, so let's talk about barbecue styles, regional styles that have been influenced by African Americans. So then you have the Carolinas, which I argue, essentially Carolina barbecue is an extension of Virginia barbecue. I argue that barbecue as we understand it, originated in Virginia, Southern barbecue, Virginia barbecue. So that's usually whole hog cooking. Today, very few people are doing whole hog. So usually what they're doing is they're cooking pork shoulders and chopping it up, and along with the cooking process, through the cooking process, adding vinegar with red pepper. That's typical sauce. So on this plate above, you've got some coleslaw, you've got your pork shoulder, your chopped pork, and you've got hush puppies. And that's a typical kind of, especially Eastern North Carolina plate. Then you've got Deep South barbecue, which to me is usually pork spare ribs, pork shoulder, Brunswick stew, and kind of Southern side dishes or soul food side dishes, with a thin tomatoey sauce that usually it may be slightly sweet, but usually has a good amount of vinegar in it. But it's like a thin sauce, kind of like almost like a glaze. Memphis. Now, Memphis is one of my favorite barbecue styles. And this sandwich is a chopped pork sandwich with mustard slaw from a place called Payne's Barbecue in Memphis. I got to tell you, that sandwich right there, that may be the platonic form of pork sandwiches. It is so delicious. But Memphis is known for kind of a pork sandwich, coleslaw on top, also pork spare ribs with kind of a slightly sweet sauce. And there's also the dry ribs, which is just essentially pork spare ribs that have been charbroiled with Greek, kind of like a Greek seasoning on it. And then also there's some funky things that show up in Memphis. I'll talk about those in a moment, but that's kind of the Memphis style. And then you've got Chicago. Now, Southside Chicago is not a barbecue region that's mentioned very often. They're known for these things called aquarium smokers. So if you can see in this picture, the aquarium smoker is essentially a metal with glass sides smoker. And there's a showmanship aspect to this, because you can show off how much meat you've got in the smoker and people can kind of see what's going on, which is not always the case in barbecue. And in Chicago, the basic regional style is rib tips, hot link sausage, fries, white bread, all drowned in sauce. And you may be able to put some chicken in there. And for whatever reason in Chicago, barbecue chicken is fried chicken doused in barbecue sauce. Makes no sense to me. East Texas. So a lot of times when we hear about Texas barbecue, people gravitate to the smokehouses in Central Texas. But the earliest barbecue by African Americans actually happened in East Texas, because there was slaveholding in East Texas in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. And so we've got reports of African Americans doing barbecue as early as that time. So the sandwich on top is a chopped beef sandwich with a very almost gravy-like barbecue sauce. So delicious. This is from a place called Patillo's. And Patillo's is a black-run barbecue joint in Beaumont, Texas, that is one of the oldest barbecue joints in Texas. It was started, we don't know exactly when, but it was either started in 1910 or 1912. So it is a definite jewel if you're ever in that area. And the interesting thing about East Texas is there's like a Creole accent, which is understandable because they're so close to Louisiana. So boudin sausage is a frequent side dish, as well as dirty rice, which is a highly seasoned rice with kind of meat in it and other things. So it's a regional style that I think needs more attention. Kansas City, growing up in Denver, Kansas City is my favorite barbecue style. Kansas City, was a very major agricultural center, and so very eclectic menu. So Kansas City is known for spare ribs, brisket, chicken, sausage, lamb, ham. Everything goes in Kansas, and with fries added on. And then Kansas is known for having a thick, tomatoey, sweet barbecue sauce. All right, so if you're going to drill down and say, what are the things you typically find on an African American barbecue menu? And I would argue that this is irrespective of where you're eating. So, even though you may be in a place that's known for a very strong regional identity, you're usually going to see these things on the menu. So first is going to be pork spare ribs. And in a lot of African American joints, the spare rib is going to have the rib tip attached. So you may have heard the St. Louis cut. The St. Louis cut basically takes a rack of ribs, which are ovular in appearance, and then cuts off the rib tip and does some other trimming to essentially give it a more uniform rectangular look. So that created rib tips. And a lot of people have now discovered rib tips. And so it used to be like this obscure barbecue thing, but now the rib tips are everywhere. But in black barbecue joints, you're more often going to see the ribs with the rib tip attached. Chopped pork is very popular. You see that almost everywhere. You see chopped pork shoulder. Chicken, usually grilled with some light sauce on it, is very, very popular. And then hot links. And in African American circles, the hot link tends to be very, very spicy and more coarsely chopped or coarsely ground. So, like the very fine sausages that you see in the store, like Hillshire Farm, those kind of things, you don't really see that a lot in black barbecue joints. So spicy, coarsely ground, and a lot of fat and juice in it when you break the skin. And I mentioned earlier rib tips, again, created by the St. Louis cut. Rib tips really kind of emerged as a popular item in Chicago first, and then have spread across the country. And then in Kentucky, Kentucky is mostly known for mutton with the Worcestershire sauce. But this is Monroe County, and they're known for pork steaks. And if you're from Kentucky, St. Louis, kind of southern Illinois, pork steaks are really popular in that area. So essentially what they do is they take the pork shoulder, but they freeze it. And while it's frozen, it's cut into either very thin or thick slices, depending on just the preference. And then those are grilled and then doused in very spicy barbecue sauce. But those are Monroe County pork steaks. Now, these are kind of Memphis specialties. One is BBQ Bologna. Now, if you've ever heard of BBQ Bologna, it's glorious. So here's how you make BBQ Bologna. What they do is they get the tube bologna, the big tube of bologna. Someone stabs it to create slits throughout the tube. And then that tube is put on the smoker for a couple of hours. And then it's taken off. And once that meat is cooked, some people call it Mississippi prime rib. Whenever someone places their order, depending on how the restaurant wants to do it, the slice of bologna can be a ½ inch to an inch thick, but usually it's more like a ½ inch thick. And so they'll cut that slice, they'll slice that, put it on the grill to get some char, and then white bread, bologna, slaw, sauce, white bread, or a bun. Awesome. Another specialty is barbecue spaghetti. So barbecue spaghetti is, instead of having marinara sauce, what you do is you make your spaghetti, and then you have this special kind of sauce that's added, and it's basically barbecue sauce with some other spices, and then you add grilled meat. I know this may sound disgusting to you, but I'm telling you, it's heavenly. Here's Arthur Bryant, and I show Arthur Bryant again. This is the guy from Kansas City, legendary barbecuer. He is the one who created burnt ends. So no matter what somebody from Texas tells you, burnt ends are from Kansas City. And originally, when making brisket, there's a certain way you cut it, and it created some excess pieces that were never served to customers because it was just too fatty, full of gristle, and all that kind of stuff. So at one point, instead of throwing the stuff away, Arthur Bryant decided to just put them in a container on the counter and offer it as a free thing to customers to munch on while they were waiting for their food. So that's where burnt ends began. All right, so the main thesis of my book is, after I show all of this history and I show how African Americans are so important to the barbecue story, unfortunately, in recent decades, barbecue media has fallen deeply in love with white dudes who barbecue. And here are the four archetypes that I would argue for white dudes who barbecue. So you've got Tuffy Stone on the far left, competition guy, very decorated, very accomplished. You've got Myron Mixon, who's a competition guy, but he also inhabits the Bubba space, right? The working class white dude from the South who shows up in a lot of different contexts, but here it very important in barbecue. And then you've got Aaron Franklin, who is like the hipster guy, right? Interesting glasses, interesting facial hair, may have tattoos, but he's the hipster who's barbecuing. And then one of the biggest twists in recent decades is the fine dining chef or the tokes who smoke, because fine dining chefs are now on barbecue in a way that they were never before. And so why does this happen? Because of foodies. You have all of these people who are intensely interested in food. They take pictures, they travel, they want to know, all about food. They're much more adventuresome in terms of the palate than their parents. And so in the late 80s, early 90s, this group of foodies emerges, and they are really middle-class people intensely interested in food. And don't get me wrong, there's always been people interested in food, but they tended to be very wealthy people who could actually think of food in a very leisurely attitude. And a lot of food media catered to them, like Gourmet Magazine, Bon Appetit. It was really more kind of high-end. Well, as foodies arise, there is a commensurate rise in food media. And unfortunately, food media was inhabited by people who were either not diverse or not interested in diversity. So at the very moment that foodies are asking, what's barbecue? Where can I get the good stuff? Food media presented white dude after white dude after white dude as experts for them to go to and people who would curate their experience. And so we see a dramatic change in the coverage during the 90s. And in my book, I chart that for you and show you how that happens. So we're now at a point where there's a new conventional wisdom that's emerging about barbecue, which is different than the way barbecue has been for 200 years, as you know, about the trench, the whole animals, cooking directly over the heat. Now barbecue is low and slow. So you're not barbecuing a turtle, but I just wanted to show that metaphor. So the idea is that you're cooking over a long period of time over low heat, usually indirectly, okay? That's considered barbecue. That you're using lesser cuts of meat instead of the whole animal. Again, that is a transition reflective of the movement from barbecue as a rural phenomenon where you had all that space where you could do whole animal cooking to an urban context where you may not have as much space, you may not have as much time. You got to figure out how to hold the meat for long periods of time so that it can be served. So that lends towards using smaller cuts of meat and lesser cuts of meat. Because anybody knows, if you're a cook, it's a lot easier to cook something when it's cut up than when it's a whole animal. And then minimal seasoning, just salt and pepper. That's more of a fine dining chef's kind of perspective. The idea, oh, you should really taste the meat, that kind of thing. That's really not how barbecue has been operating for a couple of centuries. So this is new. And then the other one that just gets on my nerve is that barbecue should not have any sauce. And I got to tell you, most African Americans would say, says who? All right. And I end by talking about barbecue's future, Black barbecue's future. One interesting figure is this guy, Rodney Scott. He's a whole hog barbecue guy out of Hemingway, South Carolina. He now has restaurants in Charleston, Birmingham, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia. And he's got some money behind him. He's got a very interesting story. He's good at what he does. So, he's a guy that may bring whole hog barbecue nationwide. I don't know if there's a taste for that. I'd love to get your feedback on that, but he's an interesting figure. And then also Ed Mitchell and his son, Ryan Mitchell. So this is a look at a whole hog barbecue at the big barbecue block party in New York City that was run in I think from 2008 to 2012 or something like that. It got so big that they had to stop doing it because too many people showed up for all that great barbecue. But Ed Mitchell is a longtime whole hog barbecue guy in North Carolina. The interesting thing is he's got his son interested in the business. His son was a guy doing private equity work, but he saw what his father was doing and he sees the potential. They ship their sauce nationwide and they're on the verge of opening a restaurant in Raleigh, North Carolina. And he's got some money behind him as well. So they may be able to franchise. We've never seen a black-owned franchise in terms of barbecue, but they may, along with Rodney Scott, may be able to do that. And then I talk about the Jones sisters. If you're a fan of Queer Eye, they were featured last year, I believe, and their sauce business has taken off. But two wonderful women cooking barbecue in Kansas City, Missouri. They got their place redecorated thanks to Queer Eye, and they're doing big things. But what I love about them is they have a barbecue vending machine. So 24/7, you can get some sauce, get your sandwich, get your barbecue sandwich on, get some to-go plates, all kinds of stuff. I just think that is genius. In terms of current trends, turkey. And so here is a box of turkey ribs from St. Louis, Missouri. And so how you make turkey ribs is they take the shoulder blade and then they cut it in a way that there's meat all around the shoulder blade, so it looks like a rib. And so that's a St. Louis thing, but you're starting to see turkey ribs show up in all kinds of places, as well as chopped, pulled, and hot links, ribs, turkey ribs, and turkey tips. And even, turkey substitutes are just all over the place. And this really tracks with soul food, because in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a move within soul food to get something healthier. And so you started seeing turkey show up as a substitute. And now that's happening in barbecue. I just think it's really interesting. And then another thing that's happening in African-American barbecue and also barbecue generally is the rise of plant-based items like jackfruit. So if you meet somebody who knows what they're doing, they can make jackfruit look, taste, and feel in the mouth like pork. And that's somebody who knows what they're doing. And so you're starting to see plant-based options show up all over the place. And then, one thing we have to talk about, because the technology is here, is lab-grown meat and 3D printed meat. And so now they can replicate meat in this way. And so a question is, will people buy into that in terms of having barbecue in the future? Because the way that we're growing meat right now, the way we raise meat and other things is not sustainable for our planet. And so people are thinking of these options. Now, there's a big psychological barrier, right? But if people adopt lab-grown meat, then, the way we do barbecue now will be around for a long time, except for this. They haven't figured out how to replicate bones. So it's just the meat itself, but not the bones. And so sorry to freak you out, but that's the technology is here right now. And so I did have to raise it in my book. And then the last thing I'll say is that, I thought I was going to be writing an elegy for African-American barbecue, but I am excited. There may not be as many brick and mortar places anymore, but barbecue with African-Americans is thriving. It's just shifted. So you've got a lot of carts, you've got food trucks, you've got the people on the side of the road or in the parking lot who are making excellent barbecue. You still have a thriving church barbecue culture. And I forgot to mention this. I don't know what the connection is between preaching the word of God and smoking meat, but a lot of pastors barbecue either as a main job or as a side hustle. It's pretty interesting. And so I'm excited about barbecue. So thank you for your time. Barbecue, it was published April 27th. And so I'm so glad I was able to share this with you. So let me take your questions. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian.
Yeah.
I have some questions that were asked that I've gathered here. I think this is definitely my question as well. Where can we go in Colorado to get the best barbecue?
All right. So in my opinion, the best barbecue joints right now are in the Denver area. And so on my website, soulfoodscholar.com, I actually list them. But my top favorites are Roaming Buffalo Barbecue. And what's interesting about Roaming Buffalo is that they're doing lamb and bison. I also like Owl Bear. So hoot, growl, growl, all one word. For those of you who played Dungeons and Dragons as young people, it's a shout out to one of the mythical creatures in the game. But Denver's barbecue scene has really jumped off. And then in southern Colorado and Durango, I like Sirius, Texas barbecue a lot. Also in Superior, there's a place called Wayne's Smoke Shack. In Glenwood Springs and Basalt, there's another place called Smoke. I've heard great things about Smoke, but I just haven't made it there. So those are some of the places that come to mind. And then in Colorado Springs, I really like Rudy's, which is not a mom and pop, but it's a chain out of Texas, but I really like their stuff. And I think they have one in Greeley as well.
Nice. Thank you. And I had also a comment that somebody wanted to know how they stay in contact with you or whoever is doing when you start getting donations again for the Columbus Hills gravesite restoration. Yeah. How can people get involved with that?
So a couple of ways. One is if you're on social media, just like me as a soul food scholar on either Instagram or Twitter, because I will be giving updates there. Or you can like my Facebook fan page, the Soul Food Scholar. Or you could subscribe, go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter, because I will certainly announce any efforts there when I get going. So it really just is gonna depend on the pandemic, but I think I'll probably launch late, probably early fall, in anticipation of doing an event the next spring.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting barbecued meat you've tasted? Quote, I mean, parentheses, you've inspired me with the image of the turtle.
So not too far off from that. So actually, and there's a recipe in my book. I forgot to say there are 22 recipes. So the most interesting thing that I've ever had is alligator ribs. And it does not taste like chicken, but it tasted really good. And the guy had an amazing mustard sauce that he served with them. So he has locally sourced alligator. So there are alligator farms, and they sourced that. He got his meat from there. And so that was the most unusual thing that I've ever had. And I thought it was tasty.
All right. Thinking of the historic ads that you shared for barbecued raccoon and a possum, have you ever made any historical barbecue recipes?
I have never done that. So one thing that I really would like to do is at some point, I would like to make barbecue like they did in the 1800s. So I'd like to do that trench and just get a feel for it. Because when I make barbecue, I do it on an oil drum smoker, which is a way that a lot of people do it. But I would like to do that type of barbecue. And then once I get the technique down, I'm game, man. I try to cook some possum. I actually want to have possum. I just want to try it because 100 years ago, believe it or not, man, that was like the dish for a lot of people. And I just want to try it. I know a lot of people don't feel possum because they eat carry-on and all that kind of stuff. And, you just catch one and then feed it some cornmeal and some other stuff, clean out the system, and then, it's
good. Well, and actually that segues with the question that I was interested in that have you ever tried the barbecue off of a shallow pit, like the old school style that you were talking about? Like, does anybody do that at all?
No, the closest thing that I've ever had is there are a few people who are doing old school barbecue the way I described it, and I've had that. And it's very similar to just whole hog barbecue. And what's interesting is you eat everything, right? So, all those barbecues that I talked about in the 1800 stuff, it wasn't like you would come up to the line and say, "Oh, I'd like some ribs, and can I get a quarter pound of brisket?" No, it's like you're going to get a hunk of meat, some bread, and some coffee. Keep it moving.
All right. If you were putting together a Juneteenth meal, what would you prepare?
Oh, that's easy. That's a great question. Okay, so Juneteenth is all about red foods. So I would have my barbecue ribs with some red, like a tomato sauce, right? Then I would have some potato salad, some coleslaw, no raisins, maybe some greens, and then I would have some watermelon and some red velvet cake, and then absolutely big red soda. You have to have a red drink, and it's big red.
Nice. All right. And is your book an historical perspective on this topic, or is it a cookbook? Sounds like it might be. Yes.
No, thank you. It is a historical treatment of this topic. It has 22 recipes, but it's not a cookbook. So, one of the kind of the back and forth that I have is I tell people say, "Oh, you got a cookbook out," and I say, "Oh, no, really, it's a history with some recipes." I'm talking about that, and they're like, "Oh, so when's your cookbook come out again?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's a cookbook," but it's not. It's really a history. So some very entertaining essays and just a treatment of the subject. And then I tried to add recipes that connected with the themes of the chapters.
Okay. All right. And this is, you mentioned Mr. Hill's brother was a famous waiter in the late 1800s. How does one become a famous waiter? Like, what do you have to do to become famous as a waiter?
Yeah, I think you have to just be known for excellent service. And the reason why I said he's famous is that there are newspaper articles about him. And so it not only in the black press, but in the majority press, So the Rocky Mountain News, the Denver Post, they were writing about this guy. And, you know, for an African American, that's very unusual to merit press attention.
How involved were African American women in the 1800s in barbecue?
Very involved. So the typical scenes that we have are Black women who are basically making the side dishes as the men are cooking the meat. But one of my favorite essays and these biographical essays that I have within the chapters is I found a woman named Marie Jean, or Mary John is the anglicized name, who was in 1840s Arkansas what we would call a pitmaster today. Back then they called it superintending, and there's an article about her superintending a barbecue. So picture that, an enslaved Black woman telling dudes what to do with barbecue in the 1840s. I mean, just let that sink in. And then she ends up buying her freedom from doing this stuff. And she stays in, the settlement was called Arkansas Post. So it was one of the earliest European settlements in Arkansas. And it was interesting because it was in French hands at one time, and then it was in Spanish hands, and then it was, you know, English or American hands. So it got a very interesting history. She stays in Arkansas Post, 1850s, runs a restaurant. And when she dies, the white newspaper eulogizes her. Now, it was tinged with some racism. There's some racist stuff said, but in the end, I mean, the gist of it is, hey, this woman is as great a cook as anybody in the U.S. So I just love that. So what you find is that as much as barbecue is shown as like kind of a all boys party or a frat party, in African American culture, Black women have been in the barbecue game for a long time, and in fact, in my own family, my mom was the chief barbecuer. And if you look at a lot of Black-owned barbecue businesses over time, there are women running them. They're named for women. A lot of times, even if it's run by a man, they will tell you, yeah, this is my great-grandmother's sauce recipe. So women are all over the place in African-American barbecue culture.
Okay, thank you. Do you know of anywhere in Colorado doing the jackfruit or other meatless options?
So I don't know if I don't know if the pandemic closed this place, but I think he's just catering now. But there was a place in Boulder called Ghost Barbecue. That's where I first had jackfruit. And so I was in Boulder for another meeting, and I was like, oh, they got a barbecue place here? Let me check it out. So I go in, and I'm looking at the menu, and I said, what's jackfruit? And the guy's like, oh, hey, man, you got to try this. And how he sold me on it is he said that there was a vegan convention a few months earlier, and a lot of the vegans came into his barbecue restaurant. I don't know why, but maybe it was the only thing that was close. And he offered the jackfruit, and a bunch of vegans, and he explained what it was. So a bunch of vegans ordered it, and they were sending the jackfruit back, and they sent it back because they thought it was meat. And I was like, all right, let me try this. And I got to tell you, man, it was good. Other places in Denver that do it. I know that Owlbear does it occasionally. There's another place called Hank's Texas Barbecue that does it. But here's the dirty little secret about jackfruit. Even with people who knows what they're doing, it doesn't sell. And so people that had it on the menu as a regular thing, they're like, nah, we're not doing that anymore. We're just going to run it as a special because it just doesn't move.
Interesting. Well, and then the last question. So what's the deal with the 3 and only 3 vegetables that you can serve on in the competitions? Like, what is that about?
It's just arbitrary, man. It's just somebody thought that was a good idea. So that's the only thing I can tell you, because it doesn't. I mean, really, is there any difference between serving it on collard greens or green leaf lettuce?
Right.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
So, you know, and every one of these sanctioning bodies has weird rules like that.
Yeah. All right, thank you. And I have another question just came in. Other than buying your book, which I've done, what can we do to elevate and make people aware of the influence of Black barbecue chefs?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So one thing is, please support these businesses. There aren't many Black-run barbecue joints left, so we want to keep them around. So we want you to support their business. Also, there are more barbecue books coming out. So Rodney Scott, the guy I talked about earlier, he's got a barbecue book called Rodney Scott, The World of Barbecue. Get his book or have the library get it. Check out his book. And follow people on social media. there are a couple people who are really interesting who are talking about barbecue, because now in today's world, your social media following gives you a lot of leverage, and it costs you nothing to follow somebody. You can even put them on mute, right? You can follow me and then put me on mute. You won't even hear from me ever again. But it helps if you follow, share their work, amplify their work. That's the best way you can help. But the main thing is, if we have entrepreneurs out there, please support them, because it's hard enough running a business anyway.
Absolutely. All right, and those are all the questions that I have. So unless there's anything last minute, I think we're at the end.
All right, well, it's so great to be with you. Just great questions, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Adrian, and everybody, thanks for attending. We do have Adrian's books at the library, so come check them out. Have a great night. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.